Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another episode review of Dragon Ball Super, which is called The Six Universes God of Destruction. His name is Champa. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So, to start off with the plot, in short words, let me just say I thought it was fantastic. In this episode, we managed to learn who Champa was, we learned about Universe 6 and 7 along with all of the other universes, and we also managed to see the fight get set up between both Team Beerus and Team Champa from both universes respectively, all in one episode. So if you don't think that's good pacing, then what really is? In addition, this episode also contained elements of both manga chapter 5 and 6, which is a fantastic sign for pacing, and I'm glad that they managed to accomplish so much in just one episode. Now, in terms of action sequences, this episode really only had two, and the first would obviously have to be where Champa's basically walking on Beerus' planet, and Beerus is blasting at him, not realizing that it's Champa, and I thought that was a great scene that they added because it added tension as opposed to the manga where basically Champa just arrived. However, for the other action sequence, I have to say the opposite, where we're seeing Beerus and Champa basically fighting and having a scuffle on the ground without really moving around a lot, and that was an interesting scene. However, when you compare and contrast this with the manga adaptation version of it, where we're seeing both Champa and Beerus in outer space fighting, and you're literally seeing the universe shaking because of their big fight, I felt that was significantly more dramatic, and I wish they had put that scene into this episode. But regardless or not, I thought this episode had, interesting action sequences, even though they were very small in this episode as a whole. Now, in terms of interesting details, I noticed that in this episode, Chozetsu Dynamic was sung in English for the opening, and I felt that was interesting because when I was looking at the subtitles were literally matching what I was hearing, so I knew for sure after watching the opening several times that it was definitely in English. I don't know if this is a one-time thing or if they're going to continue it, or if this was just the version of Dragon Ball Super that I was watching and the other versions were in Japanese, but from what I saw, it was in English this time. Now, I also noticed another difference between the manga and the anime of Dragon Ball Super when it pertains to how the fight started between Beerus and Champa. In the manga, basically Champa was pissed off because Beerus ate the puff puff fruit, and that was during their birthday, so that would obviously anger him. And in Dragon Ball Super, the anime, the difference is that Beerus made a fat joke on Champa, and then Champa called Beerus skinny, and that's how the scuffle started. So that's a little minor difference that took place in how their fight started. Now, in terms of my next interesting detail, this is more speculative, but it's basically who I think should play both Champa and Vados when they come into English. And after hearing how they sounded in Japanese, I personally feel like Greg Ayres, who voiced Guldo in the Dragon Ball Kai remake, would be perfect for playing Champa. And in terms of Vados, I thought about this long and hard, but I felt that Wendy Powell, who played Makuro in the Yu Yu Hakusho series, would sound perfect for Vados. Wendy Powell didn't have a prominent role voicing a Dragon Ball character, and I think that she has an awesome voice and she would be perfect for playing Vados, and I think that would be a great way for her to get into the series. So say in the comment section below who you would think should play both Champa and Vados respectively. Now, in terms of animation, I felt that the animation for this episode was decent for regular animation standards, but great for Dragon Ball Super. I couldn't really think of any scenes where there were derpy faces or where the animation just looked poor, so I'd say that they did a solid job overall. Now, in terms of impressions, I want to say that this episode did have a ton of dialogue. However, I didn't have a problem with it because the dialogue was necessary and it moved the plot. One thing that I do want to point out though is that the rivalry between both Beerus and Champa felt a little bit weaker in Dragon Ball Super the anime as opposed to the manga. As I mentioned before, in the manga they were having a big universal battle, and I definitely feel like that added more towards the intensity between both Beerus and Champa as rivals and as twin brothers. So I definitely like that little twist more in the manga as opposed to the anime, but this episode definitely gave me a great impression. Now, in terms of memorable moments, I have two. The first would have to be when Champa's struggling to move on Beerus' planet, and obviously it's because of the fact that he's fat and out of shape, and I thought that was a very comical moment, especially because of the fact that it was very Toriyama-esque that a god of destruction would be out of shape. And then when we go on to the next scene where we see Vados commenting on his weight when Goku basically asked, who is stronger between you and Beerus, and Vados was like, well, isn't it pretty obvious based off of his weight? That was shown in the manga as well, but I definitely felt that visually that scene was funnier looking at it in the anime. So those are my two memorable moments. So overall, I thought this was a great episode, and I'm going to have to give this episode 5 stars, as this episode managed to have good humor, something major happened, and there was even a little bit of action to entice the fans. In addition, this episode also made some nice minor changes from the manga to keep the content refreshing. So with all of that said, I'm going to have to give my thumbs up and say great job, Dragon Ball Super. However, that does not end this video, as I'm going to be going into my predictions for episode 29 of Dragon Ball Super, which is called It's Settled. We are holding a tournament, the captain stronger than Goku. Now, in terms of episode predictions, I wanted to point out by saying, considering what happened in the manga, the previews, and the title, I don't expect to see much action in this episode at all. However, since Goku was shown taking off his clothing, I do think it only makes sense for him to step up his training sequence with Vegeta, considering they need to prepare for the big fight. So if there is any action sequence in this episode, I expect it to be a training sequence. The next thing I wanted to point out is that Goku may or may not meet Monaka in this episode, who will obviously be the team captain, because we've learned that from the manga. And I'm saying this because of the fact that Dragon Ball usually shows sneak peeks at big things beforehand, and since they didn't show him at all, I'm leaning towards Goku not seeing Monaka in this episode, and if he will see him, it's going to be extremely brief. The next thing I wanted to point out is Jaco, and we saw Jaco in the preview of Dragon Ball Super, which is implying that the Galactic Patrol might be aware of this big fight that's going to happen, which could lead to some interesting plot points, and most likely Jaco is going to interact with Bulma, which is obviously leaning towards them going to go see Zuno. And for those of you who might not know, Zuno is basically the most knowledgeable person in the universe, and they're going to go towards Zuno to learn about the Super Dragon Ball. So that's what I could see Jaco interacting with Bulma for in this episode preview. And then for my next prediction, I think that we will also get a chance to see the Super Dragon Balls, or at least the ones that Champa has accumulated, because in the preview I saw 2 huge golden orbs sitting between Champa and Vados. I'm not sure what they are, but they could be Super Dragon Balls. And last but not least, since we saw a lot of Champa and Vados in this episode, I predict that Goku and Vegeta will not speak to the other Z Warriors until next episode, and Bulma will be strictly talking to Jaco. So those are my predictions for episode 29 of Dragon Ball Super, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and check out my other videos in the outro.